Good morning and welcome. Today we are going to be talking about natural disasters and your organization's planning for preparedness in this, our May 2017 Crisis Coach session. And as always, we are happy to have you join us. We appreciate you taking the time out of your morning. For those of you who are sitting with a team, maybe in a conference room, having a bit of coffee, thank you for joining. And if you have any questions or comments, please remember that you can use the GoToWebinar dashboard. Usually it's in the right-hand side of your screen. There's a little place where you can chat or ask questions. And if we aren't able to get to those in our session, we certainly will follow up with an email or a phone call to answer any questions you may have. We are Firestorm Soul on Twitter. Please follow us and talk to us. Also, we are Firestorm Solutions on Facebook, and the hashtag for this and all Crisis Coach sessions is indeed Crisis Coach. So if you ask a question on Twitter with the Crisis Coach hashtag, I'll be able to get to it afterward as well. As you know, Firestorm transforms crisis into value. We empower you to manage your risk and crises, and our expertise is in crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We are the nation's crisis coach. The presentation you're seeing today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments, discussion, and any work product provided by Firestorm should be read in conjunction with all guidance given by national, regional, local authorities, as well as your company's personal counsel. And the information given and the comments made in this webinar should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion, and the attorneys are happy. Our guest moderator today, we're very happy to welcome from the Eastern Great Lakes Association of Continuity Professionals, Sherry Vale. Sherry, would you like to introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about any upcoming events that you might want to share with the membership?
Yes, certainly. This is Sherry Vale from Health Now. I really appreciate you having me. And I am the Director of Public Relations with the Eastern Great Lakes Association for Continuity Professionals. Our organization is affiliated with the overarching group ACP, and we've been in existence since around 2003, actually, with a prior name. And just a note, I'm covering for our president, Dr. Michael Redmond. We actually have membership across Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, PA, and Ohio regions. So we're kind of widespread, and our meetings normally cover topics that span across various topics and information such as risk, cyber, which is kind of quite a big focus these days, and security information management, as well as business continuity and disaster recovery, and also crisis and emergency management. So I think, today's Firestorm topic's gonna, touch on that greatly. A couple of nice events we've got coming up if people have interest. We have a meeting coming up next week, Wednesday, May the 17th from 1 to 4 p.m. being held at EFRP Group in Rochester, New York. And you can reach out to membership at EGLACP.com for more information. Also, in the fall, September 13th is our fall full-day conference, and this will also be in Rochester at the Holiday Inn. And again, the same email address can be used for interest if people are interested in either of those events, or if you're interested in joining the organization. So again, it's membership at EGLACP.com. And with that, I think that's it for now. I can kind of turn it back over to Karen.
Thank you, Sherry. And if you'd like to, Sherry, you can use the chat function in GoToWebinar and type in that membership at email address, and that way everyone can see it in the chat function, copy it, and they'll have that. And next time I'll make sure to have that on the slide too, okay?
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much.
You're welcome. Today we are very fortunate in that Jim Satterfield, the CEO of Firestorm, is joining us. Hi, Jim.
Good day. Glad to have everybody here, and certainly the meetings at the local chapter are exciting and a great chance to network. So we'll talk more as we continue our webinar today.
Jim's schedule this month and last month has had him in about 17 states on the same day. So we are very fortunate to have him with us today. We're very excited about the work that Firestorm is currently doing globally, and exciting times, and so we're happy to work with you and your teams as we present today those things that might keep you up at night. So last month we talked about things that keep you up at night, all the various scary things that can happen in an organization, and how we might start to assess the threat and move forward in communicating that out. We talked about those terrible things. There's an injury on your property, a loss of life, your supplier is interrupted, and that's going to come into play today. Jim has some tremendous insights in that area. An epidemic or a pandemic that could actually come from a natural disaster. We know that especially when there are issues with water and water quality, those things happen. That then may affect your organization. You may lose a major client who's affected by some sort of natural disaster. The public brand damage events can go hand in hand with it. As Sherry mentioned, certainly right now, anything that has to do with cyber is something that's keeping everyone up at night. Senior leadership may fail to lead in a way that keeps our organizations resilient. We're all concerned about terrorism. And then there's natural disaster. I don't know if any of you on this call remember the commercial from I Will Date Myself, I think it was in the 60s or 70s, where you don't mess with or fool with Mother Nature. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today. We did a survey of about, I think it was about 940 or 950 or so folks just like you, and we asked what crisis event would be the #1 concern for your organization. And I'm going to ask Jim to comment on the slide because I think it's interesting, and I think it shows us some interesting data on what it is we really should be focused on. Jim?
As you look at the chart, you can easily see that 1 out of every 4 identified natural disasters. And I think as we think about what happens in the traditional all hazards approach, there's always been a gravitation toward those areas. But if you look at the quadrants immediately adjoining it on the left and the right to the natural disaster, you see loss of life at 6%. Well, many times these events can impact our people. Fire is the most common. More people die in flooding annually. And so as the Red Cross has identified 20,000 disasters annually in the U.S., immediately this gravitation goes to natural disaster. By the way, if you compare that to the 2 million episodes of workplace violence annually, you see the role that now violence is starting to play in our everyday lives. But to the left of that quadrant, you see significant reputation, an event coming. If you don't respond well in the natural disaster, that's going to really become a reflection back on the company and the organization. If I were to say United Airlines today, immediately that picture of the doctor being dragged down the aisle comes to your mind. If you have had a natural disaster event, do not manage that well, if it impacts your customers and impacts your employees, suddenly that'll become a reputation brand event for you within that cycle. So this is a significant area. It's the reason why we're devoting an entire webinar today to talk about natural disasters and what they mean and what you should be thinking about. Back to you, Karen.
Well, I appreciate that, Jim. I think one of the reasons why I was excited that Jim was able to talk to us today in this format is that I came from an industry that we worked with crisis, but not in the way we do today. And so I had to learn a lot from Jim in a very short period of time. And there's no person I'd rather have by my side for critical decision support than Jim Satterfield or our other co-founders, Harry Ruin and Susie Laughlin. And the first thing we need to do when we think about a crisis or a natural disaster that's happening, well, first thing is we want to stop. And I think Jim has some information on that he might want to share. But we want to take a moment right now when all is calm and think about the impact a natural disaster can have on an organization like yours, especially in that upstate coastal areas. You have unique weather patterns. Certainly, y'all know how to deal with snow. I mean, but there are other weather patterns and flooding that there's just no way to actually deal with. So we want to ask a more important question of, could you handle it? Could your business handle it? Could your team handle it? A well-designed and well-executed plan is going to help your company outperform your competitors. So your brand and resiliency are tied together. There's a value proposition there that you can clearly articulate to potential clients, customers, and your existing client base. But if plans aren't updated to reflect the ongoing changes in the organization, you're going to have some unforeseen vulnerabilities. Jim, this is a picture from Joplin. And as you know, Joplin is still rebuilding after many years after a tornado cut a large swath through that area. Do you have any comments today on the plans and, what's more important, your personal created methodology that Firestorm follows of Predict.Plan.Perform?
Well, lots of issues there in that lead-in. Thanks, Karen. As we think about it, what we find in most crises and disaster, everybody wants to run immediately to perform, and they skip the predict and the plan phases. Firestorm's methodology is predict, plan, perform. Predict what the vulnerabilities and threats are. What are their impacts? How do we monitor them? What are the triggers that would cause us to activate our plans? Our plans range from all the areas that you heard in the lead-in from Sherry talking about emergency plans, a business continuity program, could be a cyber breach response plan, communicable illness, crisis management. How do we make decisions in a crisis? And documenting that when we have the luxury of those times. And then under perform, how do we train everyone? How do we test our plans and where we're going? There are several new things that are occurring continually in this phase for us to think about. For any of you that touch healthcare in any way, the CMS final rule goes into effect on November the 15th. Those organizations that are not in compliance would lose their certificate of operations, which means they would no longer be able to receive Medicare and Medicaid funding. Well, you cut off that revenue stream to those types of facilities and they cease to exist. So in looking at these, there are impacts and consequences associated with each of the individual areas, and planning for those in advance will make a difference. The picture that you just showed, Karen, imagine if your employees were in those houses. They're not coming to work today. And so looking at what you're going to do and how you're going to handle those areas becomes absolutely critical. That picture that you've got up is from Joplin. It's a school. If you were a parent and pulled up in front of that school, by the way, you would have walked because the roads were blocked. What's your first question? Where is my child? And those questions are going to have to be answered. And if you look at where those elements will come in, we were working with an industry association in the construction area, and a roofing company that makes the roofing tiles that go onto homes was in the room, and he had been in Tuscaloosa with his plant, and it was destroyed by the tornado. So he rebuilt it in Joplin, and it was destroyed by the tornado. I asked the gentleman to tell us where he was going next so that we could avoid that city. But it is not business as usual, it's business as unusual in these things. And the worst disaster, the worst crisis you'll ever see is the one that affects your business, your home, and your people. Karen?
Well, so Jim, we know that the natural disasters we've seen, it has more of an effect than just on, oh, we're going to be down for about a week or two and then we'll be up and be okay. It has an economic impact on the entire community. People can't work, people don't get paid, businesses close down. It reverberates through an entire city and to other counties and then the state. So one of the things that you taught me is that disaster readiness and value go hand in hand. And you want to talk a little bit about how to bring value to your organization. Certainly we're preaching to the choir today in this particular area. But on a high level, I think it's an important concept, especially when we're sitting down at the leadership table with our C-suite and making sure that everybody really understands the value of contingency planning. Jim, are you there?
Hey, I'm sorry. I had you on a mute so I wouldn't hear the background noise. I apologize that was going on here. It's the double tracking of multiple things here in a day. It's the joy of crisis business. I think we talked about a lot of the things that are already here, but I'd like you to look at the third bullet there where it says creating a culture that's in it. Dusty, if you'll hold 1 second. As you can see, that was the other disruption that we had going on, and developing how we do this so it takes across all of the organization. The 4 dots at the bottom of the page, the emergency plan, the incident response plan, how are you going to manage your the response to it? The emergency response is what your employees are doing, and then how you're making decisions here, and then how we get back to the new norm. All of those elements need to come together to be able to handle each of those elements as we come through. So Karen, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Jim is, again, he's a sought-after crisis manager. So the points to consider here in this just first introductory part of our session, make sure we're doing a clear threat analysis, establish a formal crisis management program in advance, and assure you're evaluating all your threats and the impacts. And
let me just jump in for a second, Karen, and interrupt. I apologize. If we think about this, we talk about an all hazards approach. And generally, the focus of that is heavily skewed toward natural disasters and those types of events. We can also think about, if it was truly all hazards, we'd be dealing with strategic risk and exposures that we're in. But we're going to be focusing on onset. How much warning do you have? How long does it last? Then we're dividing the impacts around how does it impact our facility? How does it impact our people? How does it impact our finances? How it comes into each of those areas. So understanding those gives us the opportunity to prioritize those hazards and then move through and design programs to address each of those. And I think that's a strong basis, and the standards and best practices is you review that annually, and once every 3 years you go back to square one and rebuild. Karen?
Well, if you're able to, I'd love to have you lead in and comment on this.
Let me do that, and I'll do it real. If everybody look at that blue line, imagine your child being in school at the Plaza Towers Elementary and the path that the tornado took right through those areas. This is a slide that should send shudders up your neck as you look and shivers around it. Look behind the words where it says failure to train is one of Firestorm identified common failures, and I'll tell you those quickly in a moment. But it also look where the Moore Medical Center is. Now you're taking out the hospital. If we were designing a scenario, somebody might say, gee, this is way too severe. All of these events aren't going to happen, but they did. Now put yourself in the role of a first responder. Do I go to the Briarwood Elementary? Do I go to Plaza Towers? Do I go to the hospital? What are we going to do? How are we going to handle it? How do we get through? Traffic is disrupted, roads are blocked, and the emergency adrenaline is really flowing at this point in time. Now, the 5 common failures that are referenced here, the largest single failure in a disaster or crisis is supply chain failure. So this disaster doesn't even have to hit your business. It's hitting your key supplier. Imagine the impact. The second is failure to train employees for working at home. 70% of employees don't know what they're to do in a disaster, and 95% don't have a plan at home. Third is the failure to identify and monitor all threats and risks. The monitor open source intelligence is clearly available today, not only for behaviors of concern, but other risks and threats. The fourth is failure to update and test your plans. And lastly is a failure to have a crisis communications plan. All of those things came together in this event, and we've seen the aftermath. Karen?
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. So as we look forward, one of the things we want to make make sure that we're talking about when we review any of our plans is to make sure we're communicating it out to the entire organization in a way that's simple, easy to understand, and is more than a binder on a shelf. And today, you can have all of your plans and your programs in the palm of your hand on a smartphone or other device. I've worked for many organizations. Many of you on these calls have implemented great training and great training programs. But I was thinking the other day, I've worked with many organizations, large companies and corporate environments, and was never trained on any of these areas. I would have had no idea what to do. At one company I was with for 14 years. If something significant had occurred, we just didn't have a plan. And on 911, we had no idea where anyone was. We didn't have a way to, we knew we had 265 people in the air, but we weren't really sure where they were. And our key corporate offices were in Boston and New York. And so there was a point of panic. We created an intranet and discussion boards so that people could check in. But in times of crisis, we need to assure that we're not learning as we go. And we must make sure that we have our processes and procedures in place and that everyone is on board. The knowledge of what to do and when to do it is critical. Jim has worked with so many organizations and has seen, and the best thing he can advise to do is go to one of your newest hires after they've been through their orientation and give them a crisis scenario and ask them, okay, what would you do? What have you been trained to do? And see what your answer is. Go to a few people and ask and see how consistent the answer is across the board. And that will let you know some of your vulnerabilities in that area.
And Karen, I want to just jump back in. I think the points you raised are clearly on target of what we're looking at. And I want to pour some emphasis around the differences in the word of what and how. We were helping a public company, and they had an emergency situation where they needed to notify all employees in home overnight about events that were happening the next day. And so their plan was very good. It said notify all employees. That was the what. They had no how. They didn't have a notification system. They didn't have alternative emails. They didn't have home numbers. They didn't have cell numbers. So their plan failed because it didn't tell them how to do this element associated with it. So giving it to that new employee, looking at the level of detail here, will convert that plan from just being a bunch of words in a 3-ring binder to being something that's actionable. And communications are important. And your story here, Karen, is very moving about what happened in Dallas.
Well, and you just made me think of it because you were talking about, you have to make sure you've tested your notification systems. We've seen this time and time again. This is a specific situation that happened recently in Dallas 2 weekends ago, where a hacker turned on all 156 emergency sirens across Dallas, and for about 2.5 hours until they were able to stop the hack. And my concern when I first read this was, well, if they can be turned on, they can be turned off. We've got to test our systems. We had a situation here. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and we had a situation here. We've had a couple of situations, but it was after the tragic shooting at the AME Church. There was, shortly thereafter, a bomb threat at the College of Charleston. And the College of Charleston is in the center of our little downtown, so there's not a lot of land and there's not a lot of area to evacuate. And they used a new notification system for all students, but it had not been tested. So half of the students received information, the other half didn't. Some got a garbled message. And we flood constantly in our downtown. And to not have a notification system tested that works is a very frightening thing to me. So we want to make sure that we're not only testing, but we're testing the results of that test. We want to make sure that everyone is receiving the right communication at the right time in the right way. And make sure that you've set up any social accounts that will help you communicate out. Many organizations tell us it's okay, we've got a dark website we can launch in the case of an emergency. That's great, that's fantastic. Have you tested it? And have you load tested it? If a significant flooding event or other natural disaster or any event happens on your organization's campus or buildings or to a neighbor of yours, and suddenly everyone rushes to your website to get information, I got to tell you, your website's probably going to crash unless you've done significant load testing on it. So that dark website is a great idea, but it must be load tested, and then you must have at least 2 deep alternative methods of communicating. Twitter and Facebook are great for doing that. So in addition to automated text messages, you can also make sure that you have formal, well-constructed messages ready to go from your Twitter account, your Facebook account, etc. There's a very large transportation company and a huge employer, one of the largest employers in Texas along the Gulf Coast. And I watched during a very specific weather event where a hurricane didn't quite form into a huge hurricane, but it was a huge water event. And it sat on top of the small little area. If you drew a line from the center of the manufacturing facilities property into the center of this semi-tropical storm sitting on top of them. It was directly there, and it sat on top of them. It felt like, I think it was like 4 days. They just had this huge rain event. And the way they communicated out to their vendors who were trying to get in to deliver product, to their employees, families, to the communities, to their clients was stellar. It was clearly something that they thought out. And today, 3 years later, I think of that company as a company of great value because they value the people involved with the organization enough to make sure they had the right communication and plans in place. So please never think that value and resiliency don't go hand in hand. So, Jim, if you're available.
Yeah, I'm available, no problem. The communications and where you were. Go ahead.
Sorry, I love your approach of coordination, crisis, and compliance.
You'll always find pressure to communicate in a crisis or disaster of any type. And there are 3 types of crisis communications. There's coordination, crisis, which relates to the brand, and then compliance. If you think about the first incident of an event, you want to communicate to everyone what is it they should do, what is it they should not do, and those communications are always going to be the first communications in any disaster or crisis. They need to be clear, they need to be unambiguous, and they need to be direct. We were dealing with a church, and a large church, 2,500 members, but they were feeding the homeless and doing other things on a regular basis, and the office staff became concerned because sometimes there were individuals in the church that had ill intent. And so their code communication was, the florist is in the sanctuary. And they would repeat it again, the florist is in the sanctuary. That meant that there was a potential threat within the building and that you should go to the person who made that page. That's a lot to process and interpret and could create confusion. If you were much more direct with your communication, saying what it is, then it would change the outcome and clearly what are those actions you want to take. The second round is about brand and reputation. Those generally can come later. They don't have to be given immediately in the incident because most of the information you find out initially will be wrong or incomplete. And so we'll defer that to a little further into it. And then finally, compliance. We mentioned cyber earlier. There are obviously notifications that have to be made. But so your first is always focused to life and safety issues in each of those. Now, knowing about those events and having them defined in advance, because it's easier to edit than it is to create. That's the process of having message maps. If this happens, what's the first thing you'd say, the second, and the third? The messages at Virginia Tech, by the way, we just passed the 10-year anniversary of that event, around it were that they would not be defined by the event, that they would invent the future, and they would embrace the families. In any organization, this disaster is not what your organization is about. You're working to make it a safe environment, and you're going to support your employees, your customers, your vendors, all the way through. So making sure that you have clear roles and responsibilities and the actions that you want them to have in place, having a crisis communications and building those elements into it and testing it, making sure that everyone knows who the spokesperson is and who's entitled to speak. And generally, we would recommend that spokesperson not be your president and CEO, particularly around the concept here that the initial information that you learn is wrong and you're going to have to change. So how do we do this? How do we update? I heard Karen describing backup website. You're not going to just suddenly say, we'll start communicating via Facebook if you haven't already trained your people that that's the source to go to get that information. So getting these things thought through is as critical as those emergency physical actions that you want your people to take. How you manage this crisis will make a determination. Will it define you? So we would ask questions about, are you ready? How do you know? And are you sure? And the only way to know that is through testing of all the plans. Karen?
Thanks so much, Jim. I think the next thing that we need to talk about is how are we going to do all those things if nobody can get anywhere? Last year, as I mentioned, I live in South Carolina, and I am originally from New York, and I lived in Ohio for many, many years. So I can deal with a snow event. I've done a 360 on the highway in my car in snow. I don't know how to deal with flooding and really high winds, so it was all new to me. And I didn't understand how floodwaters will completely destroy roadways and all of the ancillary events that happen as a result of it. So what are you going to do if no one in your organization can get to your organization? What will you do if they're in your organization when the event happens and cannot get out? And we have situations where people are rushing to your facility to make sure their loved ones are okay and can't get to it. So we want to walk through those scenarios. This is an image, this particular image is from FEMA, from nearby on the coast where we are, as the roads just started to collapse and wash out. And there'll be some other images from Hurricane Matthew where we had a 1,000-year flooding event. So when we think about how we consider alternate plans for continuing business, Jim, how can we think about shifting operations, other locations? What should we do? Where do we start?
Well, I wanted to think back just on the previous slide for a minute about that road picture. Atlanta, we burned our highway down. Actually, a homeless person did. And which is amazing when you think about concrete and steel burning to the ground. And it disrupted 250,000 vehicles every single day. Think about the impact on who can get to work, how they can get there, and where they come. And so it leads us into the next slide, talking about looking at staffing levels. How many people do we need? How many people do we need on the first day, the second day? What are the other resources that we need to have those? So as you look at, in your business continuity program, breaking it down to the individual plans in each department, those things should be set up. Now, we were dealing with a bank that we were in the process of rolling out their program and looking at testing all of those alternative things. Have they taken an afternoon where everyone has to call in remotely, where everyone has to do those functions? And to support that in. So again, coming back, the testing of the plans, looking at these staffings, because you aren't going to have everybody on day one. You probably aren't going to have most people on day two. And so somewhere starting the third and fourth day, you'll start to see that uptick in force. What about the remote access? Can they use their own device to get into the system? How does that work, and what are the controls that are associated with it? So those are all elements for us to look at, document, but then more importantly, to test each of them. Karen?
You know, and that brings up 2 points to me, Jim. The first is when everyone in Atlanta was unable to use the main route they were used to because you burned down your expressway, the alternate route then was taken, and that created stresses on that alternate route. There was a gas fire underneath the alternate route, and the road buckled. So there was no way to get anywhere in Atlanta for a couple of weeks, or at least I believe it was a period of a few days. So we really need to consider how are we going to help assist our employees and others who can't get to our facility in a way that's understanding of the situation. And I bring that up because during Hurricane Sandy, Madison Square Garden, who I've been a fan of most of my life, put out a notice that basically said to their employees, look, if you don't show up for your shift, you don't work here anymore. And I'm not sure if they thought people were supposed to vote to work or what. It was a poorly worded, poorly thought out piece of communication. It panicked people. People put themselves in danger trying to get to a place that they really didn't need to get to because there were no events going on. And I'm not quite sure why that communication went out. So we really want to be careful about what we say, why we say it, and how we say it. Then I want us to think, everyone on the call, what is the longest you have ever been without power? Jim, what's the longest you've ever been without utilities?
A week, and it got to be very cold and very tough. We had an ice storm in Atlanta, and we were caring for my mom and my stepdad. We had an Alzheimer's patient at that point, and we were trying to keep everybody warm around a fireplace. By the way, you can burn a lot of wood in a week, and feed them from cooking things in the fireplace and looking at it. If you don't have electricity, you're going to find that you go back 150 years in time. Think about what will happen. I know we've all had a power outage and walked into our house, and I flipped this light switch on the wall to turn on the lights, and even I knew that the lights weren't going to turn on at that point. But the home here, then I understand this is around the corner from your house, Karen, and was hit in the Hurricane Matthew. Those people in that house aren't coming to work today. First of all, they're going to have to dig the car out. We don't know what the damage is on it. Look at the house, look at the family, because in every situation, family trumps job. And we need to keep that in mind, because the statement that every crisis is a human crisis is one that should drive all of us in every culture that we're looking at. Having a backup generator, having a way to keep your cell phone charged so that's your lifeline and link become absolutely critical associated with that, because that battery is going to go down and now you're shut off. You're going to have other family members or friends trying to come to you if they haven't heard from you. How you deal with this and how you establish it, it's important to identify that in advance. So Karen, I think you're 100% on target with where we're focused here, because these are the basic elements that we must address in any natural disaster. Karen?
You know, and I have to say, I've never seen my husband look more attractive than the day he walked in the house with that Champion generator. That was a beautiful thing to me. Now, I do want to say it, if you haven't experienced or you have experienced, or those of you who went through severe weather, the repercussions last for a very long time. I live in an area that was hit by Hugo in 1989. The house across the street from me was completely destroyed. Just up the ocean from us, about 19 miles, is a school that many people evacuated to. That school was then flooded by the tide surge that came in. And what happened in our recent event with Hurricane Matthew, even though it wasn't a huge hurricane, it was a significant wind event, but it was a very significant rain event. We had a 1,000-year flood, and the water we had a high tide, a king tide, that came up and flooded the entire downtown. It flooded all the way up into North Carolina and Virginia. And as those waters, once the wind event was over, 4 days later, as the waters started to recede to go back out to the ocean, the rivers flooded and the river banks flooded, and we had a secondary, much more serious flooding event. Bridges washed out, roads washed out, people couldn't get to work, people couldn't get to hospitals, people couldn't get to foods. We still had trees down across our roads, as you saw by the image of the tree across my neighbor's home. And it is far and wide, the impacts of these types of events. There were still evacuations going on, and we didn't have electricity for a week, Jim. And I know that our neighbors told us that during Hurricane Hugo, they didn't have electricity for 3 weeks. No fresh water, et cetera. So we really want to plan and think, how are we going to handle this? How are we going to support our employees, our customers, our community during a significant crisis event? By the way, all of the notes from this and Jim's comments will be transcribed into a brief that is available on the Firestorm website in about 48 hours after this session. So the last thing we really want to talk about here, Jim, is this is another picture from my neighborhood as cleanup started. And as cleanup started, people started to seek answers as to what their insurance would cover, what their business insurance policy included. Can you talk about this? Because you are an expert in this area.
When you look at most of us, when we do tabletop exercises or create those testing scenarios, don't necessarily stop to consider what the insurance recovery or mitigation would be available. So I would recommend that as you do a test exercise, hand that over to whoever purchases the insurance within your organization, ask them to give it to their broker, and ask them to put in writing how your current insurance would respond in that event. We did a cyber exercise a year ago, and there were 8 things that happened to the company. We gave it to the insurance broker and found out that 6 of the 8 impacts were not covered under their cyber policy. Finding that out in a crisis is not what you're looking to do. Give your hazard impact matrix list to your broker. Say, look at each of these and tell me how our insurance responds to each one of these threats. That's a gap. It's a loop that we find in almost every organization. And so in wrapping up our thoughts today, there has to be a structure to make these decisions, and they become very critical in a crisis. And you're not going to have all the information. It's going to be inaccurate, but you still have to make those decisions. You need a source to get that information from what's out there. We're finding today that you'll gain insights if you have a monitoring of social media to get that intelligence coming into your organization about where things hit, what happened, who can make it to work, who couldn't. If you live west of Washington, D.C., getting over the Potomac, if those bridges are out, is going to become impossible. Think about your area to understand it. Then you've got to document and test that ability to make those decisions, and then big focus on 3 things: the decisions that you make, the actions that you take, and the words that you say in that critical first hour will determine, is this going to stabilize or it's going to escalate out of control? So looking at those types of events will make a big difference. This crisis management maturity model that's shown here shows we focus on the decision process, the roles and responsibilities, the information clarity, the speed of decision making, and the communications effectiveness. And as we move from a company that's a stage 1 where everything's a liability to stage 2 where you're still in a reaction mode, at stage 3 it's supportive, you've taken some pre-action, but finally our goal is ultimately to make it a part of our culture, who our organization is. Every time you do an exercise, go through your group and let them rate. Every time you move from one stage to another, you've had a breakthrough, till finally you get a value proposition that comes in to support those decisions. That will help you determine if you're going to be ready. Karen?
Thank you so much, Jim. I was talking to my mute button. I really appreciate everyone joining us today. And Jim, thank you so much as always for your insights. As I mentioned, there will be a paper available, Natural Disasters, a Q&A with crisis expert Jim Satterfield on our website, firestorm.com/brief. And you will also receive a link to it from GoToWebinar after this session. I very much want to thank the Association of Continuity Professionals and Sherry Vale for joining us today. Sherry, thank you so much. We are at the top of the time allotted for our session, so I'm going to go ahead and close our session for today. Thank you all for joining, and have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you.